The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing. I'm your host, Dave. Today it's just me. We are going to be taking a little bit of a break, but we wanted to leave you with something to listen to, so we've decided to do something rather unconventional, just like us. And we are going to re-release an episode that initially came out on June 3rd of 2022. I'm picking this episode because this is one that we feel got pretty overlooked. And when I say overlooked, I mean this is probably one of our episodes that we enjoy doing a great deal, but I think overall people kind of glossed over it, maybe because of the title, who knows. But this is the Guide to the Terror at Small's Lighthouse. This is a story that we had overheard from history that is about themes of isolation, fear, terror, survival. It's got a little bit of everything. So when you hear this, we really hope that you, first of all, can keep in mind that we recorded this over 2 years ago. So if we sound a little unhinged, that's because we were. And also, we hope that you can appreciate why we enjoyed doing this episode so much. So here you go. Hopefully you enjoy this throwback episode, The Guide to the Terror at Small's Lighthouse. Leave us some feedback. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear it. Enjoy. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Modern Therapist's Guide to Nothing, where on each episode we take a topic, theme, or thing, overanalyze it, and make it all make sense in the scheme of life, living, and mental health. My name is Dave, and I'm joined here by Greg.
Hey Dave, how's it going?
I'm doing okay. So, as you may have guessed from the title, we are both therapists, or at least we try our best to be, and we're just trying to figure this whole thing out of life, right, Greg?
Trying to figure it all out, every single thing.
Every single thing, which is exactly why this podcast is literally all over the place. That's really intended. It's like intended chaos. Is that what you would call it?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Thank you.
Today we're going to do something we both sort of found very interesting. And I think it's a story, which is great. People love stories.
Yes.
It's sort of romantic in a way because it's about a lighthouse, and that invokes certain feelings, right, with the ocean, and it's also a story of isolation and psychosis and just creepy things, but also really what happens to people when they're left all by themselves. And yeah, I know you did a lot of research on this and worked really hard. So why don't you kick us off and tell me, what you know about this specific story.
I also noticed a theme, though, I just wanted to touch on for a second. We both seem to really like stories that influence other things that we are aware of in popular culture. So I guess we kind of both seem to like these origin stories or these stories that were just so impactful that they cause people to feel inspired by them. And we're not talking about inspired. This is like dark inspiration, but it's definitely inspired some stuff. So the story we're going to get into is about Small's Lighthouse. So Small's Lighthouse is a lighthouse was off the Pembrokeshire coast, erected in 1776. This is in North Wales, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So we're going to, flash forward. We're at 1776. This is erected. We're going to flash forward to 1801. This is when two lighthouse keepers, both named Thomas Griffith and Thomas Howell, get the duty of being lighthouse keeper, right?
Yeah.
So interesting dynamic between the two of these guys. Sources say these two gentlemen did not get along. This was a tense relationship between the two of them.
Yeah, so they should go hang out in isolation in a dark, scary lighthouse.
It seems like that just makes sense. I mean, let's take two people who do not mesh well and just let them figure it out, right? Just figure it out, guys.
I mean, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong though, but this was one of these old timey important jobs. Someone had to do this. There was no these weren't automated. Someone had to keep that light going, and that was a life-saving job. So these guys were gritty, left out, taken out to an island with supplies, and then they were out there for how long? Like weeks, right?
Yes, weeks. The other thing about this lighthouse itself is it is like, so in New England we have lighthouses all over the place. You go up to Maine and there's one like every 20 or so minutes. We have some here in Rhode Island. This one is literally a tiny island, and they're so, not only are they isolated, but they're on this compact amount of land, so they can't get space from each other. And then the entire time they're there, there's storms happening and things like that, so which are making they're not going to be hanging out outside while the storms are kind of like smashing against the lighthouse. It is, the setting of this story is insane if you think about that this actually happened. Yeah, it's nuts. So Thomas Griffith ends up having a freak accident, and Thomas Howell attempts to try to get help, but they're getting no response. So he essentially ends up having to endure weeks of Griffith suffering due to the injury, and he can do nothing about it. So Griffith is like, for him on his end, like, that's, you talk about torture. You're like in severe pain to the point where he eventually dies. And nobody's there to save you except for this guy that doesn't even like you and you don't like him. And then on the other guy's end, it's like you're just sitting there watching somebody in agony and you can't do anything to help them.
So Howell can't do anything to help him, but he also has to just like sit there and watch him as he does all the work. I mean, I imagine there's like a lot of work to do at like a lighthouse, right? When there's no, it's not like a light switch, right? You gotta keep the thing burning, and I'm sure there's like, I'm picturing them like fixing the rocks with like some kind of mortars, like constant daily chores that you must have to be doing. And Howell's doing it all and just watching as Griffith. I mean, and what is this freak accident? Like, what? Is it a freak accident? I mean, what happened?
Yeah, I didn't get good details on that. So the accident is like, I'm not sure the details, but the accident is severe enough that he eventually ends up dying. Yeah, so it's just, if you think about what leads up to the actual death, like that period of time where this guy is just, it's like Austin Powers when I'm not dead, but I'm severely injured.
Yeah. Yeah. What's funny is like that's changing the dynamic. So it's like Howell's like, oh man, I'm with this guy, I can't stand him. He's hurt, but up until this point, he's not alone. And then Griffith dies, and it's like, oh, this is a worse problem. I would imagine, right? Now you're alone.
Here's another thought that I had. Because I love throwing in horror movie references. Pet Sematary, there's the sister, Zelda.
Rachel!
Exactly. Yeah. So think about that dynamic. She is withering away upstairs. She's dying. The sister actually begins to have a disdain, a resentment for her, and actually starts to hope she would die at some point because of her suffering. I mean, it's like this cruel, like primitive part of us. I think that like when we see it, it almost becomes like when we're enduring watching someone like that, it taps into this like primal, like, I wish it would just end. Yeah. So then he ultimately dies.
I never thought of him like that. The way you're describing it is making me think of this whole situation a little bit differently. Like I have Howell like doing like little airplane with the spoon, like feeding Griffith, like because he can't do anything, right? Yeah. Like for all this time that he's sick, he's just taking care of him. And he's like, he's gonna do everything himself,
right?
And then now he dies. I guess
right. And we're also making assumptions. We're making assumption that he even did those things for him, because I mean,
maybe he died because he never fed him.
Right. Maybe he was kind of like, this, something needs to change here, and I'm just gonna let this guy. Yeah, we don't know. We have to make assumptions that there was some basic empathy there, but I mean, we don't know Thomas Howell or Thomas Griffith, so we really can only speculate. But yeah, there's so many different dynamics that could have played out. But like we said, we flash forward. He ends up dying. what would be your thought if you were alone with a man who died? Would you have the same thought that Thomas Howell had, Greg?
Well, what was Thomas Howell's thought?
Well, he was afraid he was going to get accused of murder.
Ah,
Would that be the first thing that you think of? Is people are going to think I murdered this man who had the freak accident and is now dead and nobody came to help when I tried getting help?
well, you mentioned that it was kind of known that they didn't like each other.
Yeah, I wonder if it was known before.
Yeah, so why would we? Yeah, so like I think it's a really bad idea that first of all that they're on this island together to begin with. But they must have really not liked each other. If he's like, oh my god, everyone's gonna think I killed this guy, like I've been dying to for So yeah, no, probably not. But I guess that would change the dynamic. So like now, because now it's like, well, what do I do with this guy? That's it's just those two, right? Does he put him outside? I mean, it's just rocks outside, right?
Yeah.
And if he puts him outside and it's just rocks, and the waves take him away, then they're gonna be like, you killed him and threw him in the ocean.
Yeah. Well, I think he came up with what to do.
Okay, what do you do?
Well, for 3 weeks, he did literally nothing.
Okay.
So he literally did nothing because he did not want to get accused of murdering this man. So he left him in hopes that, hey, somebody's got to show up at some point, right? Yeah, well, guess what? He didn't predict storms. He didn't predict that storms were going to prevent people from being able to access them.
So, Dave, this guy's sitting there with this person he hates, who was a pain in the ass because he couldn't do anything, and now has to go through like the daily motions of like eating and sleeping and working, and this just a dead guy in the corner.
Yeah,
I mean that is freaky because I mean weeks go by, as you're saying, and there's a dead guy in the corner who you hate, and you're alone, so your thoughts are running away with you, God knows, and you're dealing with a dead person in the room. I mean, what is that doing to him?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, because like it's one thing to be alone. It's another thing to be alone but not be alone in like the actual sense of like there's a body over there. There's nothing in that body, but like I wonder, it makes you wonder how he was able to get through that period. Like how did he just act like there wasn't a dead body there?
So if he wanted someone to kind of come maybe rescue him at this point, could he not have turned this? I mean, this is just me. I don't know. I don't. It's not like I know everything about lighthouses. I don't know a damn thing. But could he have turned this lighthouse into a dark house and just turned out the light? And maybe ships would be crashing all over the place. Maybe. But like, wouldn't that say like, oh shit, like something went down at the lighthouse. We need to go check it out. I mean, like if he shut the light off in the day or something.
When was Morse code invented? Isn't there like a signal like a blink 3 times if you need a ton of help? Just twice.
I know Morse code from those like SOS commercials. Like I know what it is, but I when was that invented? Does this guy think of it? No, I mean he's probably like waving a little flag like on top of the lighthouse. That's all I can picture him doing. But I mean my thought would be I'm shutting this thing off and someone's gonna have to. I mean, there'd probably be a pile of ships in front of the thing, but yeah. I mean, what are you gonna do?
So I didn't get to do too deep of a dive into this, and I wish I had more time to do so because this is actually super fascinating. But I heard that he also kept a log, and he wrote entries in that log again to try to protect himself. So it was another one of those protective factors. Like, I'm also going to document everything while I'm here. So if anybody has questions, I'm documenting.
Dave, I would love to take a look at that log because I bet you that's the sort of thing where we could slowly read and then watch someone drift into like the depths of psychosis, like day by day, like what's normal one day and then things get a little more wild. And then you can probably follow along and then just watch him sort of fall apart. Because something that I read about this was, and I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but they say once they finally did get this guy, his hair had turned white with fear and he was never the same again. So I mean, spending weeks with a rotting corpse as your only companion, I mean, it'll take a toll.
Yes.
Right.
So my favorite part of the story, we're not even there yet. This is the crazy part. So like, I shouldn't say this is the crazy part. The whole part's crazy. This whole story is crazy. But After 3 weeks, he could no longer stand the smell of this decomposing body. I give this guy a lot of credit. 3 weeks, he endured that smell. Good for him. So he finally decides to do what any rational person would do. He finally decides, I'm going to build a coffin.
Thomas put Thomas in the coffin.
Yeah. So he builds the coffin. He puts the coffin outside, and the storms are still going for this entire week. They end up crashing against the coffin, opening the coffin up so that the body of Griffith is dangling outside of the coffin, now in the view of Howell. So not only could he not, like, had to endure living with this deceased body, then he tries to conceal it, and the body essentially breaks out of the coffin and is now just dangling in his view, almost saying, like, I'm still here. And I have to read this passage that somebody wrote. I found this to be really good. Ships would continue to sail past the lighthouse, unaware of the nightmare. According to legend, those navigating their ships could see his arm waving or blowing, as it turned out, in the wind. They didn't know he was dead. They thought it was a flag. So it took another full week for a ship to arrive. And that's the crazy thing. And that's where you get to the point, Greg, where when they did pick up Howell, he looked disheveled. His skin had turned a shade of gray, they reported. I didn't hear the white hair part, but that sounds like, I'm sure there's probably 1,000 things we could probably find about, like, what they'll say his appearance turned into. Because, this story has obviously taken on a life of its own, which we'll get to in a little bit. But this is like an infamous story. And it's insane.
Well, there goes his idea that I want to make this look like Griffith died from natural causes. He's hanging on the side of the lighthouse by a rope, half in a coffin, smacking on the side of it, doing some kind of weird, like, wave. It's crazy how, like, things, it's almost like Catcher in the Rye, the book, where his decisions are sound, or at least they seem that way to him in the moment. And then once someone finally sees, like, everything that's happened, they're like, holy shit, what happened? Now, like, it was decision to put him in the coffin. It was a decision to put him outside. It was a decision to not, like, put his body outside. And they all kind of made sense until the end, when people are picking him up and they see this body rotting, hanging from a rope outside of the lighthouse. It must have been a sight for the people picking him up too. Like, what happened?
Imagine. Yeah. So, Greg, let's talk a little bit about kind of our perceptions about the things that an event like this. So let's say we're a Howell.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some of the impacts that this situation would have, caused.
All right. Well, first I want to say that I want to ask you a question first.
Sure.
How long do you think you and I would last out there in the lighthouse without?
All right. So, like, let's say not with a dead body, or with a dead body.
Well, I mean, let's just hope. Just you and I. Like, how long are we out there until we're at each other's throats, or we're
paired up?
Yeah.
I am one of those people that I feel, and maybe I'm overestimating my skills, I feel like I could do that show alone, except I don't have survival skills. Like the isolation piece, the show Alone, where they go into the wilderness and they have to survive for over 100 days. I actually feel like the social aspect of that I could handle. I just don't know how to take care of myself. So I'd eat.
You would die, but you'd be happy.
I would never catch an animal. I would eat twigs and berries, and that would be my downfall. So yeah, for me personally, like, I would probably do better alone than I think I would do paired up with one person in isolation like that. I just feel like that is a recipe for disaster for anybody.
Yeah. You're better off being alone, I think. Although, let's get into this a little bit. I mean, isolation historically and in our own lives. I know for me in the 80s, getting sent to your room, I mean, that was solitary confinement back in the day. There was no, I didn't have any video games or anything like that. So isolation was a punishment. Isolation isn't something that, I mean, obviously in prison, there's, what are they? It's like solitary, right? But what is it about isolation that
So I kind of think, and Greg, you have siblings, correct?
I do.
Similar in age, or is there a big age gap?
No, we're similar in age, a couple of
Okay.
years.
So here's a little something that I think plays a big factor in people's ability to tolerate isolation. I do think that some of it is also kind of like our growing up experience with having people around us. I think there are some people that are more equipped at isolation or periods of isolation than others. I think if you're someone who's very social, if you're someone who's used to being around people, let's say you grew up with siblings or you're kind of constantly around others, I think that that's kind of tends to be like it becomes your personality a little bit, right? So you
Yeah.
kind of rely on socialization.
Yeah, like people being around people though, I think that's what keeps us human. Evolutionary, like the way we evolved, it's like we have to be around. We're social animals, so we've
Yeah.
kind of learned that being around other people is the safest way. That's how we survive. That's how we continue on. And seeing other people keeps our behaviors in check. It keeps us from straying from normalcy. Like I remember, like now that I've been in a relationship for a long time, I act a lot different than when I was single. Like there was things I was trying to think about today, like what in isolation, like how do I act that's different than when I'm like around people. And I remember every Friday night I used to have, like, this is just an example, I used to have like a large pizza and chicken wings, and I would lay down on my side on the floor in front of the TV like I just completed some kind of magic trick, and I would lay there and eat like that. And then when I got in a relationship, I would lay down and eat, and people would be like, what is that? So it's on a deeper level. It's what keeps us, being around other people is what keeps us in check. It keeps our behaviors from getting a little too out of whack. And when we're isolated, we do things only for ourselves. So we're part of, like in society, we're part of like a social contract. So it sort of keeps us in line. And if we were just doing what we wanted to do all the time, there would be no society, because we would if you had a bottle of water and I was thirsty, I could get it any way I wanted. There would be no rules. So we just kind of, being around people keeps us in check, I think.
However, if there's no one around to judge us, then how do we, like, who's to say those social norms, there's an issue with those? You know what I mean? So yes, I agree about the outcome that it has, but I wonder, does it matter if you're just in isolation?
Well, I guess that's nature versus nurture kind of thing.
Right.
Like you could be, I guess it's like, it's all relative. Like it would be fine however you develop to survive on your own. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, being around people keeps us ethical.
I think
so.
You know what? It actually, not sorry to cut you off. I don't.
No, it's right.
But like I just thought of something. What you're bringing up to me is actually kind of demonstrates our adaptability. So what you're bringing up is like how we change our behaviors based on being around others. That actually is like a great example of how we adapt, and how we then set like social norms. We set societal behaviors that we think are acceptable, and that becomes our norm, and we all just kind of understand that. But when we're not in that kind of setting, we resort to more like, I have to take care of myself, I now have to do what I need to do to get my needs met.
Yeah, and that can start to get really weird.
And and those societal norms are not important, because they have nothing, those societal norms have nothing to do with getting our needs met. It's all about helping us adapt, right?
Right. Which in turn is actually getting our needs met, because living in a group, like living in a society, has done wonders for our evolution. It's made us a lot safer. We're not going around killing each other for food. So like if you think about like ethics, like that John Stuart Mill, the utilitarian stuff, ethical behavior is what's good for the most amount of people. So if we're all living that way, we have to be around other people and observe like what's good for the most amount of people. And if we're living in isolation, we're not doing what's good for the most amount of people. We're doing what's good just for ourselves. And if you bring that person who's been living in isolation, like you, Dave, if you're out there living your own social, like you're not worried about social norms, you're just doing what you have to do to survive, and then you pop into a society, what are you going to look like? You're going to have like you're probably going to be wearing like, I don't know, leaves, and you're not going to have any language, and your behavior is going to be weird. You're not going to attract anyone. You'll survive maybe for a little while, but you would survive a lot easier if you have someone who's sort of learned that they're going to take care of like the medicine, and this person's going to take care of the building, and this person's going to take care of it's the society is what kind of, helps us adapt and live longer and safer and better as human beings, I think.
I thought it was Moses who told us those societal values.
Oh, was it Moses? Yeah, he
think it was Moses.
10 good ones. I know he did.
Yeah, there's 10 of them.
I almost said you shall not pass, but that's definitely Gandalf. You can see where I could make that mistake.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sorry. So isolation, there's reasons for, we are social creatures. There is reasons behind societal norms and why we thrive in societal settings, group settings. Isolation tends to change our behavior. Our views, our values are different when we're in isolation. It also causes us, we have nothing to bounce our thoughts off of.
Right.
And then our thoughts spiral. And then we have nothing to check our thoughts against. Right. And I think that's actually probably the biggest thing. Why, I don't know if it's the biggest thing, but it's a huge thing, because if I have nothing to check my thoughts against, my thoughts could spiral anywhere, and I wouldn't know if it's true or not.
And that's why isolation leads to psychosis. Because psychosis isn't, when we see someone has psychotic tendencies or is behave like a schizophrenic, or like if you're in the throes of like a manic episode, a person who's, as we would call them psychotic in a psychotic episode, they think that they're acting completely normal. That's what's scary about it. They think that their behavior is completely normal. It's egocentric. That's a word that we use. That means it feels good. So they might be acting in a way, this person's after me, or the government's after me, or I'm running from this, whatever it is, whatever delusions they're having feel good to them. They feel right to them because they make sense to them. And that's what's scary about psychosis. And when you're talking about this period of isolation, no one's there to check your thoughts. So your thoughts can go way out of whack. You can end up somewhere and you're completely following the logic. But if someone was to observe you, they would say, what are you talking about? None of this makes sense. And if you're able to observe others and live and be around other people, you can't get that far out of hand, because you'll be observing other people. People will be checking your behavior. They'll be checking your thoughts. You might run something by someone like, is this crazy? You know what I mean? So it's completely irrational to think that isolation leads to your thoughts getting away from you, leads to psychosis, which leads to the psychosis is scary because it feels good. And then you think you're right, but you're just not.
You totally just made me think of a phrase that we say that actually just is exactly what this is all about. We actually say to people, is this crazy? And then we say the thought that we had, or this might sound crazy, but so we literally even say it as we're checking our thoughts against somebody else to kind of get an idea of if we're on the right track, if our thought process is going correct. I mean, people go to therapists for this reason, right? It's
right.
So this
we tell people all the time, yes, that's fucking crazy. No, I'm just kidding.
Whoa, I've never heard anyone say that ever in life.
Yeah. No, and it's like you can kind of rein people in and be like, oh, maybe you're having this thought because of this, or maybe you're feeling this way because of that, or maybe you're noticing someone, in a state of psychosis, and you have to, help them, protect them, from themselves and from other people. Because the scary thing about psychosis is if you think that the right thing, and I can give an example, like I have someone who, is very religious and also schizophrenic, and they live in a building where, there's a lot of quote unquote sinners around, like maybe doing drugs, doing this, doing the other thing. And then he's thinking to himself, okay, someone should really do something about this. And then he goes to his room, and his room is number 312. And it's like, okay, so 3, that's a religious number. And there's 12 disciples. I'm the chosen one. I have to do something about this. And that all feels good to this person, but it's not good. So someone needs to check that. And if that's left unchecked, that becomes a very dangerous situation, because this person thinks they're doing the right thing, but they're actually behaving completely irrationally. So that's why psychosis is scary for other people, not so much for the person experiencing it.
So some other takeaways from this person's experience, you got to imagine that now So they had their period of isolation, whatever that did to their thought process. But now you also have this really traumatic experience that they just endured, being isolated with a dead carcass and watching that body decaying. So, I mean,
is a human a carcass?
I don't know. Is it?
I almost want to say cadaver, but I feel like that's, carcass is terrible.
So, I mean, they're in distress throughout that whole time. So, that obviously has effects on the body. They're in despair. They're dealing with death. And overall, it's just a very traumatic experience. Now, I know that we sometimes have difficulty attaching the word traumatic to things. There's a lot of thought process on if we overutilize certain words. I'd call this traumatic.
I would call this is heavy on the trauma. I mean, this isn't light. People might be like, oh, that movie was traumatizing. Although you did ask me to watch a movie that kind of related to this, and I honestly feel like I was traumatized by that movie. It was a lot for me. I mean, you live in this horror world, but I didn't see this coming. It started off real nice, but Dave, you can.
Actually, let's do that. I was going to ask you a question first, but I'm going to hold off on that question, Greg, and let's talk about that movie. So the movie, obviously, you're talking about is the Lighthouse, which came out in 2019. I think is Robert Eggers is director. It had Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe.
Yeah,
Robert Pattinson is an amazing role in this one. Nothing like what you saw in Twilight, and not even like Batman.
Yeah.
So he plays one of the lighthouse keepers.
Is this the Thomases? Is this about the Thomases?
So we're gonna go spoiler alert here.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen the Lighthouse, I recommend you kind of cut us off here, or maybe skip ahead a little bit until we get past this. Yes, Greg. Yes, this is the Thomases. So he ends up having a different name, but then he ends up stating it towards the end that he is actually Thomas. Is he Thomas Howell or Griffith? I can't remember.
He must be Thomas Howell. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So he's Thomas Howell. And the other one's Thomas Wake. That's Willem Dafoe's character. So it's not Thomas Griffith. So it's not direct. Well, what Thomas Howard or Robert Pattinson's character does end up stating is that he had previously allowed his former lighthouse keeper, or what do they call wikis, partner, he'd allowed him to die in the freak accident, like it was preventable. So Robert Eggers kind of throws a little curveball here. It's almost like what would have happened later. It's almost like
like
he went to another lighthouse.
Yeah.
And we met another Thomas. So he kind of plays with the story a little bit, but he proposes the idea that what if that whole accident was actually preventable and he allowed it because he didn't like him?
Yeah, this movie threw me for a loop. I mean, at first it started off very sort of, it's black and white. It's artful,
and it's slow,
right?
Yeah,
it's slow. But I mean, I liked in the beginning that you could tell there was going to be a lot like superstition played a big role in this, and then there was a lot. There was, I mean, and earmuffs for this, but there was, I don't know, like a furious masturbation scenes and seagulls being murdered and like a mermaid.
So
I mean, this is psychosis, right?
Yes, but also some of it is like, you got to imagine they're isolated for that long.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to imagine that like they don't stop being human. They don't stop having primal needs and desires and expressing those. So you got to imagine like the sexual drive doesn't just shut off. So I'm sure that happens. I'm sure they're using vivid imagination. I'm sure there's some intimate moments with your lighthouse partner in history over time. I'm sure that's happened they kind of allude to it here without actually directly showing it. They have some really they have this really weird relationship where one minute they're like screaming at each other, the next minute they're like way too touchy-feely dancing. Yeah, it plays with so much that it's like it's over the top almost on purpose. But you got to assume that some of that stuff almost feels like you could see how it happens. The seagull part is superstition. They present the idea like that represent your former wiki partner or whatever that's deceased, and it keeps popping up. So, some of it's movie stuff that like doesn't really matter too much in the realm of this story, but we're dealing with
like, maybe you're right, and I probably would rather just be by myself. And I think a lot of this lore and a lot of this like feeling, because like years ago I was in the Navy for a while, and you just never get that lonely, I guess. I mean, I do recommend this movie though, because it takes you for a ride, and it's especially the way it ends. It's scary.
So there's another movie that I didn't recommend to you, but is also based on this story. And it is called Shepherd. It's a newer film. It just came out this year. The director's name is Russ Owen. I actually got to talk to him through my other podcast that I do, which is horror movie related. And Russ actually said he intended to make a more direct interpretation of this Smalls Lighthouse story, but then The Lighthouse came out, and he was like, "Oh well, I can't compete with Robert Eggers, who was, he's." Made some great films. So he was like, I gotta do my own spin on it. So he made a film called Shepherd about a gentleman who is basically trying to escape from his past, and he takes a lighthouse keeping job. And while he's there, his past starts creeping up on him. So again, similar stories to what we're talking about with this Lighthouse movie. It's about people who are kind of escaping their past. They're on the run, and that's why they're seeking isolation. It's almost like their thought is, I need to get away from everybody. I need to get away from all these reminders, but you can't. And we talked about inability to escape your past with the Suns episode last week, right? So it's or 2 weeks ago. It's interesting that we just like this theme comes up again.
Right. Yeah. So avoidance. It's almost like a natural inclination for us to avoid it, but it's the worst thing we could possibly do.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it's like we can never escape our past. It just keeps coming back to haunt us, literally haunt us in this movie. Yeah, so Greg, if you ever get the chance to check out this movie Shepherd, I would also recommend it because it was a very beautifully shot film. He's in Wales, so that's why this story was important to him, being close to the Smalls Lighthouse. But again, it's the similar theme. And well, yeah, I was going to ask you, Greg, like what types of things make somebody take this job? So, I mean, obviously, we're talking about people trying to escape.
Fugitive. I'm sure, like, I guess it's one of those things where if you're trying to build a future, maybe you're not going to be spending a lot of money on it, but you're just going to be making money. Sure. I guess that's one way to look at it. Yeah. Maybe, you've got I think you'd have to put yourself back in that time. I mean, it's an antiquated job. It used to be important, I'm assuming. Like, it used to be like a really important job, and it took a certain kind of toughness to do it. So I would say, pride. I guess it takes all types, to want to do some. I guess that's a hard sort of question to answer. Yeah. I mean, in my own experience, I don't like why I joined the Navy. I kind of wanted to prove that I could do it, if that makes any sense. And that was sort of my motivator. Like, I don't think anybody thought that I was the type to do it, but I mean, I did. And maybe that's part of it, like to show some kind of toughness back when that was something that people really found to be really important,
I heard this story that somebody was telling that he saw a posting right before COVID or around the time that COVID happened. And there was a listing for a lighthouse keeper position. And he had a family, but he decided he still wanted to apply because he was like, well, why not? What else is there to do? Which I thought was interesting. If you have a family, you just decide to do this. So that might be another reason maybe somebody goes.
You run for your family. That's what. That makes perfect sense.
He didn't think a lot of people were going to go for it. And turns out, he didn't get the position because a ton of people applied for it. So there is something that's alluring about this job. I guess if you love the ocean, if you love lighthouses, if you love turning a lighthouse on and off.
Well, maybe you just love getting away from like all the hustle and bustle and like the the confines of living in the the way we have to live socially, our social societal demands. I mean, you don't have to go to work. You don't have to take care of anybody. All you have to do is take care of yourself. And I think that for most of us in this society, we have a lot more responsibility than that. So maybe it's something that seems like a huge responsibility, but maybe it feels like it's almost a break.
Yeah, I agree, and that's kind of how I view it. And to me, it sounds like it would be fun and cool. I'm sure it's not that much fun, but it does sound interesting. Like, I wouldn't necessarily turn it down. I did need to see the list of responsibilities before I entertained it. But yeah,
well, now it's just you turn on the lights and leave them on.
Yeah, digitally probably.
Yeah.
But I think there's certain qualities that a person would have to embody in order to do a job like this. Like, if you are a naturally social person, you're probably not cut out for a job like this. But if you're someone who could do a little time isolated, then
probably need to be a pipe smoker, maybe a beard, sweaters, a lot of sweaters, a captain hat,
absolutely,
peacoat. You need a peacoat.
I'm just going in a pair of Vans. So yes, so Greg, so you enjoyed the movie and the take on it from the original story?
I did. I enjoyed the watching the way he sort of portrayed someone slowly losing their mind. It was cool and scary and sort of uncomfortable.
Yes, I agree. So yeah, this wraps up our Smalls Lighthouse episode. So thank you everybody for listening. And if you guys want to get in touch with us, if you guys want to throw any suggestions at us for topics or any questions, feel free to email us at moderntherapistguidetonothing@gmail.com. That's therapist with an S. And we will gladly field any of those. So signing off, this is Dave.
Greg.
See you later.